Chaim Uvracha, Baruch Atah Elena Melech Olam Shak told me of his story. If Rabbi Zippel didn't feel qualified to address the esteemed audience tonight, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to fall, but I'll do my best. Now, we've heard throughout the night that the purpose of the Farbrengen is to identify how each of us are influencers in our own right, in our own spaces, and our own environments. And in fact, my participation tonight in this very esteemed Farbrengen is very much a personal put-out moment for me. And what I mean by that is as follows. I wasn't scheduled to Farbrengen together with everybody tonight. I was hoping to attend, but not necessarily to share any ideas. But the Ma'agnim reached out at the last moment last week that they needed a substitute for one of the people, one of the folks to Farbrengen. And so hearing what the message of the Farbrengen was, that it was put out, that this was exactly the opportunity where I felt that perhaps I have to go out of my keva, and out of my comfort zone perhaps, and share some ideas. And that's why I'm here tonight. So now, emissaries, we already heard from Reb Naftali an hour or so ago about the exceptional day of Chaf Ches Nisan, which the emes was until Chaf Ches Nisan Tafshin and Aleph. It wasn't really identifiable why it was such an incredible day. He further elaborated on the Hayom Yom of Chaf Ches Nisan and the relationship of the message in Hayom Yom to the Rebbe's strong message and the importance of this day in the calendar. But maybe I'll share something that maybe there's a little more to the story about the Hayom Yom Bichlal and Hayom Yom for Chaf Ches Nisan and its relationship to this day and how it actualizes itself in my life personally and how others may be able to actualize it in their own lives. In a letter from the Rebbe Rayatz Nishmat Eden to the librarian Alexander Cohen, the Rebbe affirms that he should have received a small book, Hayom Yom, and it's a volume, as the Rebbe describes it, that establishes that every day says something, and that every day is a day. As a yed tag is a tag. Amazingly, the letter that's written to Alexander Cohen is dated Chaf Ches Nisan Tafshin Gimel. So the Rebbe on the day Chaf Ches Nisan Tafshin Gimel elaborates what the Teichen of Hayom Yom was for that day, and that the Sefer Hayom Yom establishes as a yed tag is a tag. Every day is a day. And the Rebbe explains further that the message of Hayom Yom is emphasizing that Ahavas Hashem and Ahavas Yisrael are one. And curiously, if you elaborate in the shiurim of the day of Chaf Ches Nisan, you find that it's Sheni Parshas Kedoshim, in which the pasuk says, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha." All the teichen of one day Chaf Ches Nisan. If you go back to the basis of Hayom Yom, Chaf Ches Nisan, in fact, you find that it's in a letter from Tu B'Av, from Tafresh Tzadikei. And the Rebbe relates there the Alter Rebbe's response to Hasidim, questioning whether there were two forms of Ahavas Yisrael, and they approached the Alter Rebbe, and the Mittel Rebbe had argued that it was Ahavas Yisrael, the Hasidim that it was Ahavas Hashem, and the Alter Rebbe responded that it was Chakuk in every Neshama, Ruach and Nefesh, in every Yid, that there was one Ahava, and Ahavas Yisrael and Ahavas Hashem were one. And the Hasidim left that Farbrengen, the Rebbe goes on in the letter to say, they left with that message from the Alter Rebbe, and they established Farbrengen that it should be Chakuk, as the Alter Rebbe had said, the Neshama, Ruach and Nefesh, in each one of them, that this idea that there was one form of Ahava and they were connected one to the other. And the Rebbe concludes there that once it was engraved in those early, the neshama, ruach and nefesh of those early Hasidim, that it was given over b'Yerusha to all the days that followed. So no doubt, Chaf Ches Nisan is in fact a great day, as is Chaf Tes, and as we're going into Lamed and then into Iyar. But every day gives us opportunities, and each one of us have different types of opportunities and the types of exposures that we have to different people. Now, when we're dealing with individuals, when we're dealing with people, we're dealing with people who are vulnerable. Each one of us is vulnerable. Now, vulnerability for many was determined to be a bad thing. In fact, it's vulnerability that allows us to have ahavas Yisrael, to have true love. Love emerges from complementing each other. And in fact, if Chaim Shmulevitz, the Mir Sheshiva, in explaining the bracha achrayna, Bari Nefashis Rabbis B'ches Reinan, why do we make a bracha that thank you, Rebbeinu Shalom, for creating everybody with chesroinus? Because in fact, in creating each and every one of us with chesroinus, we need another person to complement us, to make us whole in a sense. And for this, we need to have ahavas Yisrael, ahavas reim, and in that way we can be complete. There are very few fields in the world where people experience their chesroinus more than in medicine. In Mila as well. Because of Mohel, the chesaron is that there's an arla, and my job is to hasaras arla. But in each case, we're experiencing a relationship with another person who's finding themselves in a time of need. And as a physician, you step in and you try to help them navigate their time you help them navigate in their time of need, in their very vulnerable time and place. Needless to say, the last 2 years found many people in a very vulnerable place. And when people find themselves in a vulnerable place, for the physician, they find opportunity. Chalila, that the opportunity should necessarily be in the financial space. The opportunity is in the richness of helping another person when they find themselves in a place of suffering. And when you can help take somebody out of blata, out of mud, and raise them up, lift them up to be more confident and more positive about what the future holds for them, it's a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous opportunity. I'll share a couple of stories where personally I found myself in my own avodah yom yomis, where there were opportunities that being present, living in the moment, one was able to identify how to help other people in such a way that it emerges from an ahavas Yisrael. And as the Rebbe taught us what ahavas Yisrael meant, what being present means. And I'll share a couple of stories as such. So one story is as follows. I had the opportunity, I travel a lot to do brisim, and a very kind gentleman offered to give me a ride to the airport. Needless to say, he took me to the wrong airport on an Erev Shabbos, which is not a great position to be when you're having to get back for Baruch Hashem, other local brisim. So he becomes very anxious and very upset by the error. And I told him, look, I don't know that what you did is an error. There's some pu'ula that's intended to emerge from this. We'll see how this plays out. And I have no doubt that there isn't an error here. There's an opportunity here. And so he takes me to the proper airport. I board a flight, Baruch Hashem, everything is wonderful. And on the flight, the fellow comes over to me and offers to help me place my Mila kit on the overhead bin. You can't see me, but I am vertically challenged. And so any help in getting my bag up top was very, very much appreciated. And we happen to sit down next to each other. We start to converse, and it turns out he's not a Yid. That emerged quickly. As a chassid of the Rebbe, if you're engaged with somebody, the first thing you want to know is are they a Yid, and what can you do to help them in terms of Torah and mitzvah? But as a matter of course, his children were Jewish. So we engaged in our conversation further, and it turns out that he had retired for a very particular purpose, for a very particular reason. He had lost his vision, and in his profession, without clear and accurate vision, he wasn't able to continue working. As it turned out, the disease for which he lost his vision from was for a particular type of cataract that I happen to know a surgeon who specializes in exactly that type of cataract. So that's number one. I missed the flights. I could help at this another person on a flight. And then it emerges that why is he flying to my region? Because his daughter is expecting a child. I ask him, no, if your daughter is expecting a child, she's a Yidina. She needs a Mohel for her son. Tells me, well, if you were giving birth in the city where you're flying to, we would potentially call you to be the Mohel. But in fact, she's giving birth in the city where you're coming from, not where you're going. So there's no Mohel there. So what can we do? I looked at him and I said, there's no Mohel. In fact, you and I are leaving from the same city. Just like I'm coming from that city, I can go back to that city. And indeed, 3 weeks later, I was back there for a brit. Now, when you're first in that situation, when you're first in that circumstance, time seems to fly by. You're not present in the moment. There's anxiety rising. How am I going to get back home for Shabbos? But in fact, there were not only did I need to be on that second flight, that later flight, but that's from the beginning, from the start, that's how it was supposed to be. So being present and being available to somebody who finds himself in a situation, in a vulnerable place, and being able to help them out of such a circumstance is a tremendous, tremendous opportunity. Some of us have it every day, some of us have it more frequently than others, but in a sense, just being present, not being distracted by everything else that's going on around us in a 24/7 news cycle, just like there are Yediyos in a 24/7 news cycle, there are also opportunities in a 24/7 cycle. And it's our opportunity and job to tap into those moments within that cycle and turn them into a tut alts moment. Now, when we think about tut alts, there's doing, there's tutan, and then there's alts. In medicine, there's this idea of, you have to be available, you have to be ready to do. Our goal is to do. But the question is it alts? Are we doing everything we have to do? Are we going above and beyond where we need to be? And the expectation is, as physicians, that you're available whenever patients call to do everything it is that they need. And in fact, throughout coronavirus, throughout the COVID-19 pandemic over the last 2 years, the cycle of phone calls was unending. And trying to be present, myself, my colleagues around the world, Askanim, Rabbanim, etc., it created unique moments because there were no longer this idea of office hours where people can come to you at very designated times, but every moment became an opportunity. And so, in fact, to share a story, there was a call one afternoon actually, about a Yid who was in desperate need of COVID-related care. Why it landed by me, I didn't know the Yid. I didn't know anybody who knew the Yid at the time, but somehow it landed up as an opportunity for me. Now, why was it my opportunity? Because I answered my phone. Had I declined the call, I didn't recognize the number, it would have been somebody else's opportunity. But by being involved at that moment and hearing the person's vulnerability at that time, we stepped into high gear and we interceded on behalf of the person and on behalf of the family. And we were able to deliver a level of care that I believe only emerges when we have a deep Ahavas Yisrael, Ahavas Reim, And ultimately, that Ahavas Yisrael and Ahavas Reim should ultimately lead to the ultimate Ahavas Hashem, as was promised, as is Chakuk, in our Neshamas as Hasidim of the Rabbeim. And so, just to close out, when we're asked to do everything, each one of us has to slow time down, perhaps. We live in such a rapid cycle where so much is happening so fast. But how do you take every minute of every day and make it an opportunity to impact another person, another human, all of humanity, and ultimately, when we are synchronized to doing only good, to doing all things that positively impact a person who is in a state of vulnerability, and we complement each other in a most perfect way, then we're zoche to a gula shlema v'amitis. And finally, in an aspect of the Sikha from Chafkas Nissen, we see a particular aspect in the way in which the geula will be revealed. The Rebbe describes whether it is an arenu nefla'os or nefla'os arenu. And when it says kimetespa mitzrayim arenu nefla'os, we're talking about milamayla lamata. So we beg, we plead that, as the Rebbe said, should it be one, should it be two, should it be three people that are able to do everything in their power to bring Moshiach, but we see all the suffering that people are going through. We see all the challenges that people are going through. So we ask that it should be milamayla lamayla and should be kimetes mitzrayim arenu nefla'os. So the MS is not to call out on any individuals, but the awareness of what it is to be a shliach of the Rebbe, to be part of the Rebbe's meisters, is a very, it was something I first saw up close and personal during medical school, spending many a Shabbos in the homes of shluchim, sleeping on couches by shluchim to be able to have a proper Shabbos experience during a medical school education. And so to identify a couple of shluchim that were most important and vital in being a dugma chai of what it means to be ibigigabin to the Rebbe's kach, to the Rebbe's purpose, Reb Chaim Grosbaum, Reb Tivya Teldin, Reb Adam Stein, Label Baumgarten, just to name a few, where I saw and appreciated was heißt ibigigabin. One of the aspects of medicine is that there's at the end of the line there's a life in play. There's partial to a person's well-being, and it could be a person's well-being from their little toe to nebuch, the biggest krankheit. It could be anything that afflicts them. And so one thing that in medicine is to do a regular cheshbon hanefesh. Before you go to bed at night, you ask yourself, where did I leave my patients for the day? Did I forget something on behalf of one of my patients? Did I close out the day as it needs to be? And frankly, there's a pit in the stomach at the end of every day of what responsibility did I take upon myself as it affects another person? And can I go to sleep tonight knowing that I closed out the day and left everybody in a safe place? And so where you can see that in another framework is where you see the shluchim of the Rebbe doing their avodah. There are times where I was just last week on a call with the shliach, and we were talking about the importance of regulating sleep schedules, that a normal sleep schedule is important to function. I only said that to him because I know what time I get phone calls from him. So seeing his ivigigebenkeit, that it really is almost a 24-hour cycle that we're living in, is something that he sees that he's dealing with neshamas, and therefore he can't sleep. I see that I'm dealing with with people's physical well-being, which ultimately affects the neshamas and the expression of those neshamas, and that's why I can't sleep. My phone is a very curious device. It's you can actually map the number of phone calls per day, and they match the pandemic wave. They overlay perfectly on the pandemic wave. I ask sometimes people, it would be nice if you'd also call to maybe learn a sikha, it's also nice to get those phone calls, but the place where I am in, the position I'm in, is such that people need assistance and advice and guidance as a physician, and that's the position that I'm in, and that's what I have to answer to. And so many find themselves running away from the position that they're in and the opportunities that they're in. It's more of a question that the Rebbe puts forward to us, is to make every day what it is to take the opportunities of that day. And as people have become wont to say in the last 2 years, if you have lemons, make lemonade. Don't seek to make some other thing out of the day that it isn't. Live the day for what it is, expand the day for what it is, and seek that every day should have opportunities that you can fashion and move forward. And so there are many stories over the last 2 years of interactions and how relationships among Hasidim totally changed trajectories of disease for individuals, for more than individuals. It calls to mind again, and it was an Erev Shabbos, where early in COVID, there were many who were intubated and were not being transitioned to other forms of respiratory support. And there was experience from elsewhere in the world that moving to those other forms would be beneficial. But working with Ahavas Yisrael, working among Yidden, Fernalekreisen, across all colors, shapes, and sizes, literally, it was an Erev Shabbos. Somebody got the bug in the ear that they were going to resolve this problem and reached out, mamish, across the country to identify the device that would help the doctors assist the patient. And this intervention was Pesach time of that year, helped every patient in that hospital that was in that state, and it affected them for the next month or 2 months, that they were able to implement a change in care. So Sa'ach HaKol is, when the phone rings, somebody needs help, somebody needs assistance, your phone is ringing for a reason. You're being called to a mission, and you're not being called just to do in a halfway form and to let go and to move on, but you're being called to do everything. And that is a mission that every one of us in our own way can implement.